And there are more people joining us. We've had 62 people registered for our WASHA community conversation. Hi, I'm Robin Shapiro, and I'm the board chair and co-founder of the Washington State Health Advocacy Association. We're delighted to see so many people RSVP'd, so many familiar faces. Hi, Karen, and so many new faces. Hi, Rebecca. We are recording this community conversation. So if you do not want your video image included in our recording, please take yourself off of the video recording. You can do that by stopping your video or simply covering up your camera if you do not want to appear on our recording. It's 11 a.m. and we are here with Trudy James and Dale Reisner, who are two speakers for today. Hi, I'm Robin Shapiro. I'm the Washington State Health Advocacy Association board chair, and we're delighted to welcome you to the WASHA community conversation on navigating loss. Today, we have with us Trudy James, who is the founder of Speaking of Dying, and a film that many of you are very familiar with, and also Dale Reisner, who is a doctor and medical director services for OBGYN quality and safety. That's a mouthful. She is also a WASH member. We are delighted to have many of you here today. We ask that you put yourself on mute, and if you do not want to have your video appearing on our recording, please take yourself off of the video screen by stopping your video or your screen. We're going to get started in a moment, but as people are entering our meeting right now, what I'd like to do is recognize all the frontline workers, healthcare providers, this COVID-19 crisis. And if we can just take a moment of silence before we start our community conversation today. The community conversation update about what's happening from the medical perspective here in our community. Dale?
Hi. Happy to be with you today. We have now gone 1 week since our peak use of our protective equipment and ventilators and so on in Washington State. We have, I think it's as of Friday, over 10,000 cases. Again, testing is not complete, so of the reported test positive cases, there have been 500 deaths. So we know that that death rate is inflated because we're not testing everybody with mild symptoms, and we're not including asymptomatic positives as well. That's great news. We peaked earlier than anticipated. What it appears is that our deaths will still continue because there are a number of really sick people still in the hospital. And there will be new people catching the COVID virus. But if we keep doing exactly what we're doing in terms of physical distancing, a psychiatrist I know wants to call it physical distancing. I like that better than social distancing because we've actually been trying to social closer with techniques like this. So, and I think Trudy will talk a little bit about that as well. So with the distancing that we've been doing and knowing that the economy's been hit pretty hard, one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit was how we will get on the road to recovery. Before I mention that, I heard this morning that, we had the military come into Washington State, I think it's been about 2 weeks ago, to be able to help out if we got into crisis mode. They built a temporary hospital at CenturyLink Field, and because we have not needed it, they took it down quickly, and they'll build another one someplace else. But in the meantime, Vice Admiral Bono is going to stay and do some work with our nursing homes. And I think that's awesome because they have pretty much been struggling to manage on their own, and to have somebody doing a coordinated statewide effort to make sure that they have personal protective equipment and all the things that they need during this big pandemic that's, really hit the nursing homes harder than anywhere else. I think is an awesome piece of news. So I want to save lots of time for Trudy to talk, but I did want to talk a little bit because I know this is on everybody's mind. Like, when are we going to be able to kind of crawl back to a semblance of normal? So I think there really will be a new normal for us. I am hoping that that we will be more mindful of how we spread diseases and be more cautious. We won't be really safe until we have a vaccine, and that will likely not be till the end of this year, or maybe into next year. So just so you know, we're going to still have to be careful. The things that are predicted to help us, I'm going to run through them, just each one. In order for us to move out of the current phase that we're in, would be that we have a sustained reduction in new cases for at least 2 weeks, and we're not there. And can you still hear me okay?
You glitched out there for a second. Can you repeat what you just said? Yeah, thanks.
We'll need a sustained reduction in cases for at least 2 weeks. The hospitals that we have around the state need to safely be able to treat all the patients needing hospitalization without resorting to crisis standards of care. And I actually think we're there already on that one. The case rate, the last I heard, the case rate doubling had dropped below 7 days. And so we'll see what happens over the next week or so to see how that spreads out. But it is anticipated that we will not be down to no new cases until probably this time in May, or maybe the end of the first week in May. Then the other thing is that the state would be able to test all people who have COVID-19 symptoms. And right now we are not there. So we still are needing test kits and reagent. Around the state, there are various needs for that. There's some places that have created their own and doing well. We have big discussions about whether we test people who are not symptomatic when they're coming into clinical care. And so we don't even have enough tests certainly to do that. But we know that there are mild symptoms as well as the more severe symptoms. We can pretty much test everybody with severe symptoms. That's not the problem. It's the others. And if it's like any other virus, the bulk of the people that actually have the virus have mild symptoms. So we
did have last week and I just want to also thank Dale for making herself available every week for the last 4 weeks to update us on the unfolding virus. She's done just such a wonderful, wonderful job, and we're very appreciative of your time. And we did have a question about the testing for immunity and dissemination of that. So can you, for people who had not been on the previous calls, can you talk about immunity versus the other testing for the virus and how widespread that is?
Sure, I will do that. The one thing before I do that, just to finish up with this sort of trigger to move to phase 2, is that we need to be able to conduct active monitoring of confirmed new cases. So what we didn't have in the very beginning of this is we didn't have any testing. So when the first cases showed up, we were not able to track every single contact and test the contacts. And that's super important before we really widely open up the economy. So yes, it's really important to think about antibodies. So when we get sick, we produce antibodies. The original body response is to make an antibody called IgM. And the next phase, and the timing varies between IgM and IgG, production, depending on whether the person's immune system is intact, and also what the particular virus's process is with that. And IgG should confer, so it would say that you've had COVID, even if you weren't tested and you had mild symptoms and you wonder, and it would confer some degree of protection for not getting it again, at least this season with the current COVID virus that's running around. What we don't know is, I'll just say that there is research that's been done on that, and some of this is available, but it's not available widespread yet. It's not even available clinically for us to use in the hospital. For employees, for instance, coming back, we're using standard testing, making sure they're negative and symptom-free and all of that. So when it becomes more available, we may be able to get people back to work who have known immunity for now for COVID-19. And so that gives us another avenue to kind of get the economy restarted by bringing those folks back in, the ones who were told to stay home and never did get tested, potentially could have their blood checked for that antibody, and we'll see where we go with it. We don't know, because it's a brand new virus, we don't know how much immunity that gives us. And I'll just throw out that what we're hearing now is even caregivers who clearly had it, they were tested, they were positive, plenty of times gone away for the symptoms, and they've been tested and they're negative. Some of the people are still worried about being around them. So there's still a lot of fear, and balancing the fear and the science, I think, is going to be an ongoing challenge for all of us. So
yeah. And we do have a question about what tool might be the gold standard we would use to help loosen our restrictions in healthcare and in the broader world. Do we have an answer to that question?
We don't. So we have a bunch of rapid testing now that's either being developed in places on their own. University of Washington has a test that's a turnaround in about 2 hours. Their Abbott labs produced a rapid, like 15-minute result. What we don't really know is what the false negative rate is on that. And so how reassured are we when we have that information? And we also Abbott has not produced millions of those tests yet. We really need more information before we have a gold standard. Right now, the PCR, it's polymerase chain reaction test, is the gold standard for who's positive. But that is limited and will be used probably within the healthcare system and other kind of key functions.
That's great. Thank you, Dale, for that update. And we do want to, and Dale, thank you for sticking around, as I'm sure there will be questions that we want to field towards the end of the presentation portion of this. So one of the things that WASHO is looking at is, what's going to be most helpful for our community in terms of content and programming to provide you. And we're delighted that Trudy James, many of you who many of you know, is available to talk about navigating loss, not just death, but the losses that we are all feeling. So she's going to talk to us a little bit about what is loss, anatomy of loss, and how to navigate that. We're not going to focus so much today on mental health resources. That is a potential topic for us to tackle in and of itself, because we've heard people are interested in that. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Trudy for the next little while. Trudy?
Thank you, Robin, and thanks to all of you for what you're doing, what you have done. Some of you know me really well. I've worked with AIDS for 20 years with volunteers in the early days who did some of what health advocates do before there were health advocates, and especially in the early days. But right along, we dealt with the things you're dealing with, so many unknowns, so much fear, so many deaths. So I know what you're up against, and that's one reason I'm glad to be here with you today. I want to say a little bit about, I want to talk about things that will apply to you personally because of the work you're doing, but also that hopefully you can use with the people you're supporting. So if I want to say for you and for everyone else, if we've ever lost a child or a parent or a pet or a job or a relationship or some aspect of your health, you've been through loss and you know something about the pain. And we live in a culture that hates sadness. So sadness is part of loss. And we live in a society that wants you to just buck up and get going again. And that's our tendency now in this situation, is to focus on all of the ways we're going to recover and how we're going to move forward and how will we ever get our normal life back. But I think it's really important that we give some time to our own grief and what we're losing right now. First, what all are we losing? I don't have to tell you, there are so many losses. We've lost connection with people. We just have lost our whole normal way of life. We're losing our faith in our leadership. We don't know exactly who to trust, and many, many losses. And I just want to say something about the normal, not normal, normal, about the aspects of grief and loss that we forget about, that we have. Most of you, if you've had a loss and have ever gone to a support group, you or you're professionals, so you've studied grief and loss, so you know, but I want to mention these again, that loss has physical symptoms. So fatigue and tiredness and aches and pains, especially eyes and throat and heart, those are a normal part of loss. But people don't know that, so they think they're getting sick because we're all afraid of getting sick. But it's normal to have physical symptoms of loss. Then there are all the other symptoms, the numbness. I know people that are not here, fortunately, but in the Midwest, who are still in denial about whether this is really happening. That's part of loss, I think. Numbness is just not feeling anything. Anger is normal. Disorganization is a normal part of loss. I don't know about you, but I feel quite disorganized a lot of the time now because our normal routines, our normal psychic way of dealing with life has been interrupted. So we often feel disorganized. People feel depression. They feel regret. They feel guilt. Those are all normal. They're part of the process. It's a natural process, grief. But if we don't honor it and ignore it, it can stick with us for a long time. It can make us sick. It can go underground, and we'll find ourselves lashing out at people that we would never get angry at, or being angry at ourselves for things that we thought we were long past getting angry about. So I think grief needs to be honored and acknowledged. And yeah, I think you get a lot of positive strokes for moving on and thinking of resilience and courage and hope and all of those important things, which I believe in as much as you do. But I also think we have to admit the darker side that is part of grief. So that's why I'm here today, to talk about that. And then I also want to say that it's my own personal experience with working with people for many years and in groups and being a hospital chaplain, that there are some things we can do that will be helpful for our grief and for the grief of people we're working with. And so I want to list some of those, and then we want to give you time to ask questions. So I think the most important thing is for people to talk about it, and most people don't want you to talk about your sadness or your or your anger or any of those symptoms of grief. We want to hear you talk about your strength and how you're getting over it. But I say we all need to talk about the losses and how the sadness affects us. And if you're very fortunate, you have someone you can talk to. If your clients are fortunate, they can talk to you. But not everyone knows how to listen to loss. And people will sometimes try to say, you don't need to feel like that. I know you wouldn't do that, any of you, but people have done it to me, and they say, oh, you can get over that. So what we want to do is listen without fixing. I sometimes say listening is fixing. Listening is what is needed here. And if we get a chance to talk, then we'll move through it. That's the main one. But there are also some other things that I think are important. And one of those is crying. So we're not allowed to cry in this culture. Tears are forbidden pretty much. And they're another natural part of loss. So if your clients are crying, I hope you will tell them what a good thing that is. And I hope you'll allow yourself to cry. And for me, I have to sometimes listen to sad music or watch sad movies. But I just had a client this week who said she's just crying constantly all day, every day. And I said, that's a normal reaction. We could all be crying. This is the saddest thing we've ever gone through in this country. In many ways, we've had more losses than we've ever had before. So there's a great deal of sadness, and we need to honor that and allow tears to come. And the next one I want to mention is nature, and I know you already know this one, but I'm telling you, when they close Green Lake and I can't walk there, I am totally aware that we need nature. We need the natural world, and we need to be outside, even if it's only for a little, a tiny walk. We need to see the sky. Maybe we need to just see our favorite photographs of when we were at the ocean, or be somewhere where we can hear the water, because we're part of nature. We are part of nature, and to be reminded that these natural processes are happening. So now it's spring. We're seeing the rebirth side of it. There's also the death side of nature. It's natural for things to die and be reborn, and that's sort of what's going on here. So being out in nature, even if we're not always conscious, it's affecting us. So to encourage, I know your clients, or many of them, I have friends whose parents are shut into single rooms, but they all have a window, and they all have maybe a tiny little porch so that they could just even see the trees blooming in the sky. And then I have two more, then I'll be done. Simple acts of kindness, finding some small way to help someone else often helps. Even if it's just making what you consider an insignificant email or phone call to say to someone, I miss you, or I love you, or whatever you can say to someone who's isolated, or other small acts of kindness. And you know, there are many things that we can do right now that they're very small, but one of my neighbors knocked on my door and left a message that he would be glad to move heavy things for me. And I thought that that was great because I can't do that. So little acts of kindness will make you feel better and help with your own loss. And finally, I'm a big believer in rituals because I think grief is too deep for words or actions often, but a ritual is where we're putting intention into an action that carries meaning and weight. And so it could be planting a flower with the intention of knowing you're doing this to honor your loss, or reading a poem, or my favorite, lighting a candle, but to be reminded of the light in yourself and the light in other people, and doing these little rituals intentionally. So it might be journaling. If you'd have no one to listen to you, journaling is a perfect ritual for getting your feelings out, or sitting in silence intentionally. So what makes it a ritual is your intention. It's a small action that carries your intention. But there is a mystery to grief, and there's a mystery to what we're going through. I think it was Dale who called it the soup of the unknown. We're all in the soup of the unknown. But if we can stop our busyness even for a few minutes and notice and honor our grief, I promise it will help. That's all I can say about that.
So this was great to kick us off in terms of what we all might be thinking and experiencing. Some of us, like myself, who have adult-aged children or multi-generations under the same roof unexpectedly, also are seeing other people's losses. So people not graduating, not being able to do sports, people not being able to get married, people distancing around births. And so it feels like other people's losses are often magnifying our own losses. How do you have some tools or suggestions for how we deal with that and support our loved ones as we are supporting ourselves and clients?
So if I didn't already say it, everyone is experiencing loss. It's universal and it's unique to each person. So Robin listed some things so I have family members going through their own losses. I think one of the best things we can do, both for them and ourselves, is to remember that we can't fix their loss and it might trigger our own loss. And then if we can listen to them, if we can ask them questions like, what's the hardest thing about this for you? Or what is it about what we're going through that's causing you any distress or pain? I tried this with my 2 adult grandsons, and they wrote me back immediately, emails telling me what was hard for them. For one, it was that his friends had all lost their jobs and he still had his. Mm-hmm. So that you don't know what it's going to be. And whatever it is, one of my grandsons said it was triggering his anxiety. So I want to fix all that, but really it's better if we just ask the questions and let them talk. So that's my answer. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And I'd like to invite people on the call to please use the chat function to send in your questions. I think that one of the challenging things is that we don't know what the future holds. So it feels, in my experience and from what I'm hearing, that things are changing. We've heard from Dale Reisner every single week, all the many different things from the healthcare experience that are changing every single week. So in times where we just don't know, are there some areas to focus on, or how do we navigate not knowing, because we always want to know everything?
I think that would be the universal loss right now, is loss of control. We're used to having some control and knowing some things, and we can't know. So that's very, very triggering for our loss symptoms. And I, I say all the deep spiritual traditions say that unknowing is the best place to be for growth, in any kind of inner growth. So I just want to say, I'm hoping that we see, as a result of this, a lot of inner growth, because we're all experiencing a lot of unknowing, and talking about it will help. Saying, I can hardly stand this, that I don't know when these events are going to be rescheduled, or if they're going to be rescheduled, or if anybody's going to come to anything ever again. We don't know.
Glitched out there.
We don't know.
Yeah.
And so talking about it and saying we don't know, that's about my best answer.
Yeah. And I have this from Rosie Reed, who says it sounds so simple but important, asking the person what's hard for them, and then listen. What's hard for you?
So
and then
good.
Listen.
Hard.
I also have this question from Judy West saying, can you please, Trudy, can you please repeat the types of questions that you would ask people?
Yeah. So you can ask almost anyone, what's the hardest thing for you about this crisis? And, or what makes you feel sad right now about this crisis? Or what do you miss the most? That's a good one for triggering loss. What is it you're missing about the way things were? Our culture doesn't want us to think about things like that. They want us to focus entirely on what comes next. But especially for people who have lost their health or that are older, I think it's healthy to talk about what we've lost and remember. And then I sometimes will remind people that memories are gifts, and having those memories is important. And to talk about their memories is good things, not as sad things, but that they're fortunate they have memories of another time. And we're making memories now of this time. So
I have another comment, which is, our country has been changing for many decades in terms of demographics and age, gender, race, ethnicities, etc. How can we acknowledge, honor, and elevate the contributions to American grief from these resources? For example, this person is Latina, and crying is very normal in her culture. So how can we actually honor all the contributions from our collective country mourning, and maybe utilize that for benefit?
So that's a wonderful thing to bring up. And it would be good to notice and ask yourself, what does my culture bring to grief and loss? I think the Latino culture has much to offer all of us. And what's that wonderful movie, the Disney movie? That's a great movie about loss. What is that movie? You know what I'm talking about?
Coco.
About the Day of the Dead. What's that movie? Coco. Yeah. So, but I think many cultures have their own gifts to bring to this. And I'm watching British television. They, are thought of as being very buttoned up. And they went through so much loss in the Second World War, but they had their ways of dealing with it. And they've added to our culture, I think. And I just think that's a perfect question for us each to explore, because I have friends who are Jewish. They have beautiful prayers for mourning. I have friends who are Siddha yoga. They have some beautiful prayers for healing loss. So this gets into the ritual part of finding rituals that work for us.
Mhm. I have a question here for Dale. Wondering if Dale, this is from Julie Forkesty, wondering if Dale could repeat what program is starting for nursing homes because the video glitched at the time that you talked about that. If you could repeat that, please.
Sure. It's not a specific program. It's that Vice Admiral Bono, who came to coordinate all the efforts when the military came and built the temporary hospital at Century Field. Now that that has been taken down and most of the support staff are going other places where they're still in the middle of the most intense part of the pandemic in their area. She will remain in Washington State and is dedicated to working with nursing homes and trying to coordinate efforts. We heard last week how challenging it's been just for personal protective equipment for the nursing home staff, for the people that clean, for the people that come in and are caregivers. So I think having somebody who is able to coordinate across our state, some of the smaller towns don't have much focus on that. We know that all of the residents of those nursing homes are vulnerable, and so are their staff. So I just think that's a new thing. I just heard it this morning, so I don't know what that's going to look like, but it is one little bright light, I think, and something hopeful to help get that community some attention.
Is he a vice admiral in what? The Army, the Navy? Do you know?
She's a
Oh,
she.
she. Oh,
Yay.
thank goodness. That's wonderful. So she in the Army or the Navy, or do you know?
Oh shoot,
She was in the Navy. She's former. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I guess to be a vice admiral, you'd have to be Navy, right?
it's
Yeah.
good to have that little bit of news.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
It is positive.
Yeah, and something to share with people. Yeah.
I have this suggestion, which I think is great, from Sean D'Amelio of With a Little Help. And she contributes and says, I often tell people to let their loved one's name pass over their lips often, to become their memory keeper by sharing stories about them, especially to those who have lost them. And I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you,
Yeah.
Sean, for sharing that.
Beautiful.
And I have, let's see, I do want to invite Lashana Williams, who runs A Sacred Passing, to speak for a moment about caring for loved ones as they die, especially in the time of COVID. Lashana, if you can pop in here for a moment just to talk about what you're seeing from the front lines of that experience, please. And then I have some other follow-up questions. Lashana. Oh, I don't have her here. Okay, so she'll hopefully join us in a moment, but
I'll say something about that.
yeah.
In that there are many, many people dying alone because of the way this disease is, and that concerns me. And what we can do, I don't know. I think people are trying to use iPads and put the nursing staff have been doing their very best to put the phone up to people's ears. But when people have to leave this planet without saying goodbye or without saying I love you or having loved ones, I think that's tragic. And I think that's one of the things we can ritualize. But if we do lose someone, or we know someone who's lost someone, we can say the things we wish we could have said to them. And I'm giving you a resource that I'm sending out to my mailing list that has a poem that I am including about the people who have died in this epidemic. So I just think it's very heavy and huge, and we have to acknowledge it. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, that's great. And we will be putting together a resource list that we will send around to the folks that have participated in this call and make that available for you. I do want to uh, include a common experience shared by Maureen Cures. Hopefully I said that her last name correctly. It said, last week I encountered many people suffering loss of control because of parents who will not obey the stay in place recommendations. This has been common. Most have parents that live elsewhere. They are so worried about their health and safety. Besides listening, how can we best support our friends and colleagues in this situation? And I think part of that is for Trudy, and part of that also is for Dale.
Yeah.
So Trudy, do you want to take that first?
I just want to say I have those relatives also, and I've just had to accept the fact that it's their life and that I can't make them do anything. And I can tell them, and there are resources out there for people. If they choose that, I think we have to let that be their choice. That's my advice. That everyone gets to make their own choice about their life and their death. We love people and we want to keep them safe, but we can't always do that.
Yeah. And Dale, do you want to speak to that too, in terms of if you have anything to add?
How to make them be safe, Dale? Do you know that answer?
Beth Droppert shares that she sent her sister a 3,000 piece puzzle to keep her busy and at home.
I love
which is great.
right.
And I'm gonna just unmute Sean D'Amelio, who would like to also share. I don't know if I can unmute you.
Wait, I'll say one thing while you're getting that.
Okay.
My niece sent her youngest child to live with my brother. My brother's not observing any of the precautions because he doesn't believe in the virus really. But she sent her youngest daughter for him for homeschooling, and it's taking all of his time, so he can't, so he has to stay home. I thought that was brilliant.
Oh, that's funny. I'd like to invite Sean D'Amelio to jump in here. You have a short story to share.
Yeah, I was sharing stories, but one of them is that my husband, good for us, just passed away in the hospital. Exactly the same kind of situation where he didn't have COVID. His wife wasn't able to be with him. He didn't have his own phone with him when he went in. And you know, I've listened to my husband past week, really taking him through the loneliness, being in the hospital. And I think just having that human connection, both of them both cried. They both talked about their fears. Sorry, I always get emotional. I think it's a place to be when people are greeting somebody at the front doors and saying, okay, I'll see you soon, but they're really saying bye and they don't even know it sometimes. I mean, he was talking about they were going to ask him to come home and just going home because they couldn't get him into a skilled nursing. And so all these emotions that are floating around, I was trying to talk to my husband, just how do we those emotions and how do we help her, because he called to tell him
There's Lashana.
phone
Yeah.
calls.
Yeah.
And it thing to process the thing he kept saying all week is I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And so he to their house and
Sean,
did
for
the
some
things
reason you're glitching, so I'm gonna go ahead and invite Lashana Williams. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
And I'd like to invite Lashana Williams to jump in here with the sacred passing in terms of what she is seeing from the front lines in terms of helping people die. Lashana?
Thanks for your patience. I had to move to my phone in order to interact. I could just listen before. It's been really difficult, and it's made my brain sort of twist. working with, I have worked with no folks who have died of the virus, just folks who have died from other reasons. But really sort of having to craft new ways to engage has been really meaningful, and something that we've had to do on the fly, just with really following feelings, and everything is very specific to that individual. One person, we had a Zoom call with a bunch of nurses because they were a nurse, and they died of cancer. So it was not a surprise. Everybody was prepared for this death. But as we worked, all of the nurses cut masks. And with each mask, they said something that reminded them or told a story about the person. And I I recorded the call and then I wrote a list of all of the words and feelings that were brought up, and sent it out to everybody. And so when they delivered the masks, they also brought the list with them to the people.
Nice.
So they knew all of the things that were swirling around. One of the important parts that I think we're not talking about, though, as like a society, are all the people who are caring for folks who have no clue what they're doing and no desire to be doing that, because they thought they would have more support around them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And as an organization, we put together like a PDF, like, what is it to be a caregiver? How do you care for yourself while being a caregiver? How do you make sure the space is conducive for everybody? And so that's totally free on our resource page. You can download it, and it goes into depth, and it does go into body care, and it goes into different ways to wrap ritual around what you're doing. It's like cliff notes from all of our classes put in one, so that it's kind of digestible for people.
Nice. So if you can share that with us, Lashana, I'd like to share that with our group in a resource list that we'll be sending around. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
for that. Wonderful. I'd like to invite Maureen Cures to talk about anticipatory grief.
Oh, hello, everyone. Okay. Yeah, anticipatory grief. Getting people to talk about this well before it's ever necessary is something that can be challenging, but it is so helpful. People that deal with these emotions, get their affairs in order, everything that is so important, and then share those with their families and their friends and the people that matter most, have a much easier time when this happens. When Sean was talking about the people dying alone, that just cuts to my heart. I have been so emotional over that, probably more than everything else, because my background, I've been a nurse for over 30 years, but the first 15 years I was in bone marrow transplant, oncology, but ICU, and I've been there at the bedside and watching people. I've been with people in isolation for 100 days, and their family members were still able to come in. They were still able to be there with them. And to think of the person dying in the ICU, scared and afraid and alone, is just overwhelming to me. And those nurses that are at their bedsides doing all they can, as they're exhausted and emotional, they are the true heroes in my book. But, if you have talked through all of this and what to anticipate if something like this ever happened, you can, the grief that you experience is still powerful and real, yet it's so much easier to move forward. It's so much easier to not get mired down in the depression of grief and all that. I don't know if you guys if you all have heard about the woman whose mother died at the life care facility, and then she was called later that day to say that she was okay. That's my husband's medical assistant. And in speaking with her, one of the things that she was so grateful for is that she and her mom had had all the conversations. They had never anticipated this happening, yet they had all the important conversations that mattered. So even though she's grieving the loss of her mother, she's not grieving with devastation. She's just grieving with the loving grief that comes from the loss. So getting people to talk about it well before is so important.
That's great. Thank you for contributing to that. And it's a really good segue into talking about what people have been doing, what positive things people have been doing to manage the losses and the grief. Like in our family, for instance, we're going to have a COVID time capsule where we talk about what's happening currently and, you know, funny things, hard things. You know, we're all cooped up together, and we've done some things that we would never have done had this not happened, to be opened at a time in the future, and also with a wish for what we want in the future. And I'm curious, of the people who are on the call, what other positive things are people using to manage through? Maureen,
I'm going to jump in. My
Yeah.
son has been videotaping his brothers and, you know, my husband and myself about what we're going through and the feelings. He has all these questions because he said, you know, 50 years from now, when his grandchildren are asking what it was like, he wants to have this video recording so he can capture our emotions. And it's been very interesting to go through that process. So
that's a great idea. Great idea.
Wonderful ideas. And I want to just add, though, that in a way, COVID deaths remind me of the people I've worked with who've lost someone to suicide, where because it's so sudden and you don't expect it, and COVID has taken many lives quickly, where people weren't prepared and hadn't done the wonderful things that Maureen talks about, which we should all do, is talk about our own death ahead of time. But if people haven't done that, writing letters to someone who has died suddenly can help you say goodbye when you didn't get a chance to, and talking about your love for them. So I recommend writing letters to people who are gone if you didn't get a chance to say goodbye to them.
Yeah.
That's Trudy. I have happened yesterday. A moment I wanted to share it with people because
You just keep cutting out, Sean.
Yeah, Sean, for the audio is terrible. If you can send it in through the chat function, because it keeps on glitching out.
Yeah.
I also want to have, sorry about that. So I also have a question from Annie Jacobson, who says, for people who aren't able to have the technology to connect, Trudy recommend anything that we send into people in isolation to support them if they're not able to.
Right.
Yeah.
So can they receive letters and cards? Because I really believe in cards and notes, but I don't know, can they take those into them and read them to them in isolation?
I'll just add that most places have waiting periods of getting packages or mail to the residents in the nursing homes and in other nursing facilities. So it's not impossible, but there might be a delay in when they would actually, get it. And it's mostly just to be sure that the outside of the package or the envelope is, virus free. So that is a little bit of an impediment for getting it right away. Yeah. Another thing, though, is that there are some of the facilities that have iPads that they have purchased and are and they're teaching their staff to help connect. And I actually have a 92-year-old aunt up in Canada, in BC, and we've been able to FaceTime with her. She's not at all able to do anything with tech, and she's just had great joy. Trudy, it reminds me, because the thing that really made her the happiest with the very first call that my niece did was seeing a hummingbird outside of her window when she was staying. So those kinds of things, I think, if the facility can do that or already has that available, is an awesome thought.
And I want to recognize Annie Jacobson to jump in here. Annie works with people and families with dementia specifically. Annie, if you can jump in.
Hi, everybody. So good to see so many of you. One of the things, as far as bringing things to a community, somebody brought those candles that you can click, and as part of ritual, doing that, and then now they're doing it together at the same time of night with their loved one who's in the community. So
Oh,
those can
neat.
be
That's
nice.
a wonderful idea, Annie.
Yeah, those are really a nice thing right now. So one of the things that I've been getting a lot of calls about, and I also work in home care, and how are people with dementia handling this right now? And the biggest thing I want people to know, and so many of you probably already do, but the fact that the logic, the understanding of why certain things are happening is reducing, but the reading of emotions is powerful. They can read our stress, they can read our anxiety, they can read our fear, they can read our sadness. So I've done coaching with several families lately, a few of our caregivers that are pretty much the only person these individuals with dementia see, and saying, check yourself, go shake it off. And in normal times, I talk about if you have a morning where the bed's wet and you got to pick up the prescription and you go and you're like, hi, mom. She's not going to read, hi, mom, I'm happy to see you. She's going to read stress. So in these times, especially with this grief, it is so big. We need to realize that those with dementia need us to care for ourselves so that we can bring to them a little bit more grounding, a little bit more balance, because the words don't mean as much as the energy does. So that's
really helpful, Annie.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for the chance, Robin.
So, and Sean sent in the chat what she was trying to explain on the video, which is that she has 2 aunts in 2 communities that are on lockdown, and she called one of them and kept merging the calls until she had all 5 siblings on the phone together, and it was so beautiful to hear them laughing and teasing each other. It literally made her cry, and these are her father's siblings. And so what a incredible blessing to be able to merge all those calls. That's a great idea, Sean. Thank you so much for sending that in. And she also said, my dad and uncle sang "You Are My Sunshine" to my aunts.
Oh,
That's
Really, really, really sweet. So while we have another minute or so, does anybody else want to share any coping strategies or ask any final questions before we wrap up this community call? It's been really great. Carolyn Gray, Virginia Mason has a very good program for traumatic loss and separation that is now called restorative retelling. Highly recommend 1 to 2 day training for providers and advocates for future reference in person, but they may have some online resources for caregivers at this time. So we're going to save this chat. And so Carolyn, thank you for sending that. We'll include that in the follow-up response that we have. Thanks for including that. Anybody else here? Let's see. Vanessa Laughlin of Bannister Advisors says that Bannister Advisors is working on co-hosted trainings with Virginia Mason on grief service, and they have hosted 2 other trainings this year. So once she gets those up and running, we'll go ahead and send those around to folks. So you can participate and refer to them. So that's great. Thanks, Vanessa, for sending that in. Judy West says, how do people access the saved presentation? So we have recorded this call, and on the front page, thank you for asking that, Judy, and nice to see your name. I haven't seen you in a while. So on the front page of washa.org, anyone can access any of these presentations. They're called community conversations, and they're on our website at washa, WASHAA.org. And Vanessa is just saying for restorative retelling, especially for traumatic loss. So that's great. So I want to just thank Trudy James and Dale Reisner so much for sharing this time and helping us as we are all collectively navigating loss together. And Greg Berkman, who is a WASHA board member, is just reminding me to remind everybody what WASHA does. So we are a thank you, Greg. We are a not-for-profit organization focused on helping people transform from being a patient to an active participant and partner in your care. And so what we do is raise awareness, provide skills and training, and connect you with resources. And we hope, as you are doing all other organizations, that you will join us either as a free community member or as a supporter member for $50 to help us continue to do the work that we do. And we're very grateful for partners on the call like Sean D'Amelio and With a Little Help and Bannister Advisors, and many of you who are already supporters of our work. So thank you so much, everyone. And we will follow up and also have a survey to see if you would like additional community conversations in the future. So thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, Robin.
Bye.
Bye.